Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, we're glad you found us. And if you've been here before, you already know we don't do anything halfway. Before we dive in, take 2 seconds to hit that like button, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs to hear a good comeback story, and subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. Now, let's get into it. The folder was already on the table when Jeanne got home. She set her keys down, loosened her scarf, stood in the doorway of the dining room and looked at it the way she looked at unfamiliar contracts, quietly, without touching it, reading the room before she read the document. Marcus was already seated, jacket on, wine poured. The picture of a man who had prepared for this conversation the way he prepared for press conferences. Talking points ready, outcome already decided, smile calibrated to project reasonableness. "Sit down," he said. "I want to talk." She sat. He slid the folder across the table like it was a budget proposal. 3 pages, legal formatting, his signature already on the last one in the clean blue ink he used for everything official. "I had it drawn up," he said. "I think it's fair." Jeanne opened it. Read the first paragraph, then the second. Her face gave him nothing. An arrangement, the document called it. A mutual and voluntary modification to the terms of their marriage. Separate romantic freedoms, maintained household, shared public standing through the duration of the campaign cycle. Romantic freedoms. "There's someone," Marcus said, before she could speak. "Her name is Callie. You've met her. It's been a while." Jeanne set the page down. "How long?" "That's not the—" "How long, Marcus?" He looked at his wineglass. 8 months. 8 months. While she had attended his fundraisers and memorized his talking points and introduced him to every powerful person in this city who now owed him a favor, because she had asked them to. "If you don't sign," he said, voice dropping into something quieter, more deliberate, "I'll file by the end of the month. The prenup holds. You'd walk away with your practice and your personal accounts. The house, the investments, the property, all of it stays with me." He paused. "Let that land. I'm not trying to hurt you, Jeanne. I'm trying to be honest." She closed the folder, looked at him for a long moment. At this man she had made, piece by careful piece, year by year. "I'll need a week," she said. He nodded, relieved, refilled his wine. He should not have been relieved. She did not sleep. At 3 a.m, Jeanne sat in her home office in the dark, the folder open on the desk in front of her, her phone in her hand. She called her sister Carol, who answered on the second ring, groggy and immediately alarmed. "He's been seeing someone for 8 months, Jeanne said. "And he had a contract drawn up." Carol said every right thing. Jeanne barely heard her. Because in her other hand, she was holding a business card she had carried in her wallet for 4 months without ever using it. Cream cardstock, embossed lettering, a name she knew well. Everyone in this state knew it. Judge Harriet Voss. Federal Circuit. The woman Marcus had publicly humiliated at a campaign event 2 years ago, called outdated, called a liability to the bench, and made into the most dangerous enemy he never bothered to manage. The judge had pressed the card into Jeanne's hand at a bar association dinner afterward and said, simply, "If you ever need anything, you call me directly." Jeanne had smiled politely and thought nothing of it. Now she turned the card over in her fingers, once, twice, and thought about everything. "Jeanne?" Carol's voice came through the phone. "What are you going to do?" She set the card down on top of Marcus's folder. "I'm going to review the document," she said, very carefully. She gave herself 3 days. She did not confront Marcus. She did not cry. She went to work, came home, made dinner, asked about the campaign schedule, and listened to him talk with the attentive patience she had perfected over 11 years. She smiled at the right moments, refilled his coffee, and every night, after he fell asleep, she went back to her office and kept pulling threads. It started with the beach house. She had noticed the refinancing paperwork 6 months ago, a passing detail, a document Marcus had mentioned casually and she had not thought to question. She pulled it now. Read it properly this time. Her name was not on it. It had been refinanced entirely in his name through a holding company she did not recognize. She wrote it down, kept pulling. The investment portfolio they had built together over a decade had been quietly rebalanced 14 months ago, transferred in increments, small enough to avoid triggering alerts, large enough to matter, into a sole ownership account she had no access to. The lake property, the commercial rental on Whitmore Street that she had found, negotiated, and structured the purchase agreement for herself. All of it, methodically repositioned. She sat very still for a long time. This had not happened because of the arrangement. The arrangement had happened because of this. Someone, Marcus, his business manager, possibly his attorney, had spent over a year quietly moving everything of value to higher ground before the flood they were planning to create. The folder on her desk was not an offer. It was a notification that the exit had already been built. She just had not been told which door she was being shown to until now. Jeanne opened her desk drawer and took out a fresh legal pad. Wrote one name at the top, Vera Caldwell. Forensic accountant. 12 years in financial litigation. The most precise mind Jeanne had ever encountered, and the only person she trusted completely with something like this. She picked up her phone, dialed. Vera answered on the third ring. "It's Jeanne," she said. "I need your eyes." Vera called back in 48 hours. She used the word systematic. She used the phrase coordinated repositioning. She listed 7 accounts, 4 holding entities, and 2 refinanced properties, and she read them aloud in the flat, clinical tone of a woman who had testified in federal court 14 times and knew better than to editorialize. Jeanne listened without interrupting. When Vera finished, there was a brief silence. "How long did this take to build?" Jeanne asked. "Conservatively?" Vera paused. 18 months, maybe more." Jeanne thanked her, hung up, and sat in her office for a long time without moving. Then she unlocked the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, the one with the separate key she had never put on Marcus's ring, and began to pull files. 11 years of files. She had documented everything, not out of suspicion, out of professional habit, the same instinct that made her a good attorney. You write it down, you date it, you keep the original. Every contract she had drafted for Marcus's business interests, every LLC she had structured at his request, every campaign finance account she had established, organized, and filed when his political ambitions graduated from local council to something larger and more expensive. And at the back of the drawer, in a manila folder with no label, the shell company. Marcus had asked her to create it 3 years ago. A straightforward request, he'd said. A vehicle for certain expenditures. She had built it cleanly, documented it thoroughly, and handed him the paperwork over dinner. He had nodded, filed it somewhere, and, she understood now with complete certainty, forgotten entirely that she was the one who built it. Forgotten that she held copies of everything. She opened the transaction records. Read through them slowly, page by page, the way she read anything that was about to change the shape of a case. Campaign contributions received, disbursements made, and there, threaded through 14 months of entries, a pattern that had nothing to do with political expenditure and everything to do with Marcus's personal investment accounts. She closed the folder, sat with it for exactly 1 day, not from hesitation, but from discipline. She had learned long ago that the most powerful moves were the ones made in stillness, not urgency. Then she reached into her wallet and took out the cream cardstock with the embossed lettering she had been carrying for 4 months. Judge Harriet Voss answered her own phone. Direct line. Second ring. "Judge Voss," Jeanne said. "This is Jeanne Burritt. We met at the Bar Association dinner 2 years ago. You told me to call if I ever needed anything." A brief pause. Then, with the measured interest of a woman who had been waiting for something useful to arrive. "Mrs. Burritt? I remember you perfectly. What do you have?" Jeanne looked at the folder on her desk. "I think," she said quietly, "you're going to want to see these records in person." She told him over breakfast. "I'll sign it," she said, without looking up from her coffee. "I've thought it through. You'll have it by the end of the week." Marcus set down his fork. She could feel the relief move through him from across the table, the quiet exhale of a man who had been braced for a fight and was now recalculating his morning. He said something generous about how he knew this wasn't easy, and how he respected her composure. She nodded at the right moments, topped off her coffee, left for work 12 minutes earlier than usual. She did not think about him again for the rest of the day. What she did instead? She called her tailor. She called 3 clients, property developers who had been asking her to lunch for months and whom she had always been too carefully invisible to accept. She called the organizing committee of the State Bar Foundation Gala and confirmed her attendance for Friday evening. The wardrobe took one afternoon. Clean lines, nothing decorative, the kind of clothes that said, "I have been here the whole time, and you simply weren't paying attention." Deep green for the gala. She looked, her assistant said with visible surprise, extraordinary. Judge Voss met her at the entrance Friday evening and walked her in with a hand at her elbow and the proprietary ease of a woman introducing someone she had already decided to champion. Within 20 minutes, Jeanne had been introduced to 3 federal prosecutors as the sharpest estate mind in the state. You'd be lucky to have her on anything you're building. Photographs circulated by Saturday morning. She did not post them herself. She didn't need to. By Sunday, 2 of Marcus's longest-standing donors had texted her personally. A profile in the Regional Business Journal requested comment on her upcoming projects. Old colleagues who had gone quiet during the campaign season were suddenly, warmly, back in her inbox. She was reading through them Monday morning when Marcus came into the kitchen, phone in hand, a strange expression arranged carefully over something she had never seen on his face before. He turned the screen toward her, one of the gala photographs. Jeanne and Judge Voss, mid-conversation, lit beautifully, looking like the 2 most formidable women in the room, which they were. "You know Harriet Voss?" he said. His voice was level, practiced. But underneath it, threaded thin as a fault line, was something new. Jeanne looked at the photo, then at her husband. "We've known each other for years," she said simply and returned to her coffee. She did not tell him that Judge Voss had spent 90 minutes reviewing a certain manila folder 3 days ago and had used the phrase "clean and prosecutable" twice before they finished their first glass of water. Some information, Jeanne had learned, was most powerful in the moment it was withheld. Callie called on a Tuesday. Jeanne was between meetings, reviewing a trust amendment for a client, when her assistant appeared in the doorway with an expression that was half apology and half fascination. "A Callie Marsh on line 2. She says it's personal." Jeanne looked up, considered that for exactly 2 seconds. "Put her through." Callie's voice was warm, carefully modulated, the voice of a 29-year-old woman who had spent years managing difficult people in high-pressure rooms and believed she was very good at it. She said she hoped Jeanne was doing well. She said she wanted to reach out personally because she respected Jeanne enormously and felt that given the circumstances, a direct conversation between women was the mature and healthy approach. She used the word transition 4 times in 90 seconds. Jeanne let her finish. Then, in the same quiet tone she used when cross-examining a hostile witness, she began. She noted the date Callie had been added to Marcus's campaign payroll. The date the beach house refinancing was initiated, 11 days later. She referenced 3 strategy meetings held at their family home, during which Jeanne had personally prepared dinner, and pointed out that Callie had been present at all 3, which Jeanne now found instructive in retrospect. She mentioned, briefly and without drama, that she had spent 20 years in contract law and was exceptionally fluent in the difference between an asset voluntarily surrendered and one quietly extracted without disclosure. "I want you to understand something," Jeanne said, as pleasantly as she would close a client call. "This transition, as you're calling it, is not proceeding on the timeline anyone has planned. I'd encourage you to speak with your own attorney before our next conversation. Do you have one?" Silence. "Take care, Callie," Jeanne said, and ended the call. By Thursday, Marcus's campaign manager had rescheduled 2 internal meetings without explanation. A deputy fundraiser told a mutual acquaintance who told Jeanne over coffee that the mood in the campaign office had shifted noticeably in the past week. One donor, Richard Hale, Marcus's most generous, had requested a private lunch with Jeanne. Then a second donor called before she could respond to the first. She was drafting her reply to Richard Hale when her assistant appeared again, this time carrying a small sealed envelope marked with Vera's initials and nothing else. Jeanne opened it at her desk, a single index card. 4 words in Vera's precise, unhurried handwriting. "I found it, all of it." Jeanne read it twice, set it face down on her desk, pressed her fingertips together, and looked out the window at the city for a long, quiet moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Vera back. "Tell me everything," she said. Vera came to the house on a Wednesday evening. She arrived with a canvas tote bag, a portable hard drive, and the expression of a woman who had uncovered financial fraud before and understood that the moment of revelation required a certain gravity. She did not make small talk. She set everything on the kitchen table, opened her laptop, and laid the documents out in the order she had prepared them, chronologically, cleanly, the way evidence was meant to be presented. Then she walked Jeanne through it. $340,000. Not moved all at once, that would have been detectable, amateur. Moved in increments of 8, 12, 15,000 over 18 months, routed through the shell company Jeanne had built at Marcus's request 3 years ago, dispersed into a personal investment account held in Marcus's name at a private bank in Connecticut that appeared nowhere in their joint financial disclosures. Every transaction bore his authorization signature. Every routing instruction had been issued from his campaign office email. There was no gray area, no plausible misclassification, no version of this that an attorney or a jury could reasonably interpret as error. It was deliberate, it was documented, and it had been constructed inside a legal entity that Jeanne herself had designed, registered, and filed, which meant she understood its architecture better than anyone alive, including the man currently sleeping in her house. Vera stopped talking. Jeanne sat with the documents for a long time. She thought about the fertility specialist appointment 14 months ago, the one she had attended alone because Marcus had a campaign breakfast he couldn't reschedule. She thought about the anniversary dinner she had shortened because he needed her to host a donor event. She thought about every conversation she had quietly redirected, every opinion she had softened, every version of herself she had folded smaller so that he could stand in the space she cleared and look large. 18 months. He had been doing this for 18 months, while she managed his calendar and drafted his agreements and smiled in photographs beside him. She closed the folder, looked at it for one more moment. "He ran this through a company I built," she said. Her voice was completely level. "Every account, every routing number, every filing structure. I designed all of it." She looked up at Vera. "Which means I can prove every single cent." Vera held her gaze, nodded once. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary Wednesday evening. Inside Jeanne's kitchen, something that had been building for 11 years quietly finished assembling itself. She picked up her phone and texted Judge Voss 3 words. "It's all here." The reply came in under a minute. "My office. Thursday morning. Bring the originals." 6 weeks later, the mediator's office was on the 14th floor of a building Jeanne had walked past 1,000 times without ever entering. Clean lines, neutral colors, the deliberate absence of anything that might suggest one side of the table over the other. She arrived 7 minutes early, arranged her documents, accepted coffee from the assistant, and drank half of it before Marcus's team came through the door. There were 3 of them. Senior partner, associate, paralegal carrying a box that suggested they had prepared for a longer fight than they were about to get. Jeanne had brought one attorney, Margaret Osei, who had 30 years in matrimonial and financial litigation, a reputation that preceded her into every room, and the calm, unhurried demeanor of a woman who had never once needed to raise her voice to win. Marcus came in last. Jeanne had wondered, in the quieter moments of the past 6 weeks, how she would feel seeing him. Whether there would be residue, grief, or anger, or the complicated tenderness of 11 years suddenly condensed into a single moment across a conference table. There was nothing, she found, simply clarity. He looked smaller. Not devastated. Marcus was too composed for that, too practiced at projecting stability. But smaller, the way a room looks smaller once you understand it was never as grand as you believed. He had the careful stillness of a man who had spent 6 weeks learning exactly how much he had underestimated the situation. Margaret and the senior partner exchanged the pleasantries of opposing counsel and began. It did not take long. Every asset Marcus's team had repositioned over 18 months had been legally identified, flagged, and returned to joint status. Vera's documentation was airtight. The beach house, the investment portfolio, the commercial property on Whitmore Street. And at the end of the asset schedule, one line item Marcus's attorney had apparently not anticipated: a 10% ownership stake in Marcus's primary business entity, drafted quietly into their original agreement 11 years ago by the attorney he had married and subsequently forgotten to keep track of. He signed everything. The room was very quiet by the end. The paralegal gathered documents. Margaret reviewed the final pages with the unhurried thoroughness of someone billing correctly. Jeanne recapped her pen. Marcus looked at her then. Not with anger. That had clearly exhausted itself somewhere in the previous 6 weeks. Not with pleading. With something hollower and more permanent than either. The expression of a man taking inventory of what he had held and chosen to discard without ever accurately assessing its value. "I underestimated you," he said. Jeanne picked up her portfolio, stood, smoothed her jacket with one hand. "I know," she said. "That was always your problem." She walked out without looking back. Margaret fell into step beside her. The elevator doors opened immediately, as though the building itself had been waiting. Neither of them spoke until they reached the lobby. "Coffee?" Margaret offered. "Absolutely," Jeanne said. And that was the end of that. 2 years later, the nameplate beside the corner suite read Burritt and Associates Estate and Financial Law in brass lettering that caught the morning light cleanly and without apology. The firm had 14 attorneys. 3 had followed her out of her old practice the week she resigned, without announcement, without drama, simply appearing at her door with their resignation letters already signed, because good people recognize the real thing when they see it leave a room. The rest she had chosen herself, carefully, the way she did everything that mattered. Judge Harriet Voss sat on the advisory board. Vera was CFO. The anniversary dinner last spring had drawn 47 guests, 11 of whom had once written checks at Marcus Burritt's fundraisers, and now considered their loyalty to Jeanne the better investment, which, by every measurable standard, it was. Marcus had taken a plea agreement. No prison. Fines, restrictions, the permanent erasure of the political future he had spent his entire adult life constructing. He had relocated quietly. Callie had moved states before the ink dried. The world that had once orbited his ambition had closed over the space he left with the calm indifference of water. Jeanne thought about all of it occasionally. Not with anger. Anger was expensive, and she had better things to fund. She thought about it the way you think about the case that taught you the most, with a kind of cold gratitude for the clarity it produced. She was at her office window on an ordinary Thursday morning, coffee warm in both hands, watching the city 14 floors below, when she recognized something she wouldn't have had words for 2 years ago. The city was looking back. Not at a senator's wife. Not at the quiet woman managing someone else's legacy from the background. At her. At the name on the door. She had never been broken. She had been made small, and had, for too long, assisted in the making. That was finished now. She took a slow sip of her coffee and felt, with the deep and unshakable certainty of a woman standing exactly where she was always meant to stand, that every hard thing had been necessary. She had not just proven him wrong. She had made the question irrelevant. And that is where we leave Jeanne Burritt. Not at the end of something, but at the beginning of everything she was always capable of. If this story hit differently for you, if you found yourself nodding along or holding your breath at any point, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us what moment got you the most. Give this video a like if you think Jeanne handled it exactly right. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story like this.